Hello, hello, everyone. We are back today with another reading out of the Passion Translation. Today's reading is found in the book of Mark and is going to be chapters 7 through chapter 12. If you are watching this on Facebook, the footnotes for these chapters will be in your comment section of this video. If you're watching on YouTube, they will be in a separate post, so be watching for those. But for now, let's go ahead and get straight into our reading for today with chapter 7. One day, those known as the Pharisees and certain religious scholars came from Jerusalem and gathered around Jesus. They were shocked to find that some of Jesus' disciples ate bread without first observing the prescribed Jewish ritual of hand washing before eating their meal. For the Pharisees, like all other Jews, will not eat without first performing a ritual of pouring water over their cupped hands to keep the tradition of the elders. Similarly, when returning from the marketplace, they ceremonially wash themselves before eating. They also observe many other traditions, such as ceremonially washing cups, pitchers, and kettles. So the Pharisees and religious scholars asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the age-old traditions passed down by our elders? They should first ceremonially wash their hands before eating." Jesus replied, "You are frauds and hypocrites. How accurately did Isaiah prophesy about you phonies when he said, 'These people honor me with their words while their hearts run far away from me.' Their worship is nothing more than a charade, for they continue to insist that their man-made traditions are equal to the instructions of God. You abandon God's commandments just to keep men's rituals, such as ceremonially washing utensils, cups, and other things." Then he added, "How skillful you've become in rejecting God's law in order to maintain your man-made set of rules. For example, Moses taught us, 'Honor your father and your mother, and whoever insults or mistreats his father or mother must be put to death.' But your made-up rules allow a person to say to his parents, 'I've decided to take the support you were counting on from me and make it my holy offering to God, and that will be your blessing instead.' How convenient. The rules you teach exempt him from providing for his aged parents. Do you really think God will honor your traditions passed down to others, making up these rules that nullify God's word? And you're doing many other things like that." Then Jesus called the crowd together again, saying, "Hear my words, all of you, and take them to heart. What truly contaminates a person is not what he puts into his body, but what comes out. That's what makes a person defiled." When Jesus went back home and away from the crowd, his disciples acknowledged that they didn't understand the meaning of the parable and asked him to explain it. He answered them, "Are you as dull as the rest? Don't you understand that you are not defiled by what you eat? For the food you swallow doesn't enter your heart, but goes into your stomach, only to pass out into the sewer. This means all foods are clean." He added, "Words and deeds pollute a person, not food. Evil originates from inside a person. Coming out of a human heart are evil schemes, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, treachery, debauchery, jealousy, slander, arrogance, and recklessness. All these corrupt things emerge from within and constantly pollute a person." Jesus set out from there to go into the non-Jewish region of Tyre. He intended to slip into a house unnoticed, but people found out that he was there. But when a woman whose daughter had a demon spirit heard he was there, she came and threw herself down at his feet. She was not Jewish, but a foreigner, born in the part of Syria known as Phoenicia. She begged him repeatedly to cast the demon out of her daughter. Finally, he said to her, "First, let my children be fed and satisfied, for it isn't fair to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." She answered, "How true that is, Lord, but even puppies under the family table are allowed to eat the little children's crumbs." Then Jesus said to her, "That's a good reply. Now because you said this, you may go. The demon has permanently left your daughter." And when she returned home, she found her daughter resting quietly on the couch, completely set free from the demon. After this, Jesus left the coastland of Tyre and came through Sidon on his way to Lake Galilee and over into regions of Syria. Some people brought to him a deaf man with a severe speech impediment. They pleaded with Jesus to place his hands on him and heal him. So Jesus led him away from the crowd to a private spot. Then he stuck his fingers into the man's ears and placed some of his saliva on the man's tongue. Then he gazed into heaven, sighed deeply, and spoke to the man's ears and tongue. Oh boy, Ethpathak, which is Aramaic for "open up now." At once the man's ears opened and he could hear perfectly, and his tongue was untied and he began to speak normally. Jesus ordered everyone to keep this miracle a secret, but the more he told them not to, the more the news spread. The people were absolutely beside themselves and astonished beyond measure, and they began to declare, "Everything he does is wonderful. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." During those days, another massive crowd gathered to hear Jesus again and again. There was no food, and the people were hungry. So Jesus called his disciples to come near him and said to them, "My heart goes out to this crowd, for they've already been here with me for 3 days with nothing to eat. I'm concerned that if I send them home hungry, they'll be exhausted along the way, for some of them have come a long, long way just to be with me." His disciples replied, "But could anyone possibly get enough food to satisfy a crowd this size out here in this isolated place? He asked them, "How many loaves of flatbread have you got?" "7," they replied. Jesus instructed the crowd to sit down on the grass. After he took the 7 loaves, he gave thanks to God, broke them, and started handing them to his disciples. They kept distributing the bread until they had served the entire crowd. They also had a few small fish, and after giving thanks for these, Jesus had his disciples serve them to the crowd. Everyone ate until they were satisfied. Then the disciples gathered up the broken pieces and filled 7 large baskets with the leftovers. About 4,000 people ate the food that had been multiplied. Then he dismissed the crowd. Afterward, Jesus got into a boat and sailed to the vicinity of Dalmanutha. As soon as Jesus landed, he was confronted by the Pharisees, who argued with Jesus and tested him. They demanded that he give them a miraculous sign from heaven. And with a deep sigh from his spirit, he said, "What drives this generation to clamor for a sign? Listen to the truth. There will absolutely be no sign given to this generation." Then he turned and left them, got back into the boat, and crossed over to the opposite shore. Now the disciples had forgotten to take bread with them, except for 1 loaf of flatbread. And as they were sailing across the lake, Jesus repeatedly warned them, "Be on your guard against the yeast inside of the Pharisees and the yeast inside of Herod." But the disciples had no clue what Jesus was talking about, so they began to discuss it among themselves, saying, "Is he saying this because we forgot to bring bread?" Knowing what they were thinking, Jesus said to them, "Why all this fussing over forgetting to bring bread? Do you still not see or understand what I say to you? Are your hearts still hard? You have good eyes, yet you still don't see, and you have good ears, yet you still don't hear. Neither do you remember. When I multiplied the bread to feed more than 5,000 people, how many baskets full of leftovers did you gather afterward?" 12, they replied. "And when I multiplied food to feed over 4,000, how many large baskets full of leftovers did you gather afterwards?" 7, they replied. "Then how is it that you still don't get it?" When they arrived at Bethsaida, some people brought a blind man to Jesus, begging him to touch him and heal him. So Jesus led him as his sighted guide outside the village. He placed his saliva on the man's eyes and covered them with his hands. Then he asked him, "Now, do you see anything?" "Yes," he said. "My sight is coming back. I'm beginning to see people, but they look like trees, walking trees." Jesus put his hands over the man's eyes a second time and made him look up. The man opened his eyes wide, and he could see everything perfectly. His eyesight was completely restored. Then Jesus sent him home with these instructions: "Go home, but don't tell anyone what happened, not even the people of your own village." Then Jesus and his disciples walked to the villages near Caesarea Philippi. On the way, he posed this question to his disciples: "Who do the people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptizer, others say Elijah the prophet, and still others say you must be one of the prophets." He asked them, "But who do you say that I am?" Peter spoke up, saying, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Then he warned them not to breathe a word of this to anyone. From then on, Jesus began to tell his disciples that he, the Son of Man, was destined to go to Jerusalem and suffer great injustice from the elders, leading priests, and religious scholars. He also explained that he would be killed and 3 days later be raised to life again. Jesus opened his heart and spoke freely with his disciples, explaining all these things to them. Then Peter took him aside and rebuked him. But Jesus turned around and glancing at all of the other disciples, he rebuked Peter, saying, "Get out of my sight, Satan, for your heart is not set on God's plan, but man's." Jesus summoned the crowd along with his disciples and had them gather around. And he said to them, "If you truly want to follow me, you should at once completely disown your own life. And you must be willing to share my cross and experience it as your own, as you continually surrender to my ways. For if you let your life go for my sake and for the sake of the gospel, you will continually experience true life. But if you choose to keep your life for yourself, you will forfeit what you try to keep. For what use is it to gain all the wealth and power of this world with everything it could offer you at the cost of your own life? And what could be more valuable to you than your own soul? So among the unfaithful and sinful people living today, if you are ashamed of me and my words, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of you when he makes his appearance with his holy messengers in the glorious splendor of his Father." Jesus said to them, "I tell you the truth, there are some standing here now who won't experience death until they see God's kingdom realm manifest with power." After 6 days, Jesus took Peter and the two brothers, Jacob and John, and hiked up a high mountain to be alone. And Jesus' appearance was dramatically altered, for he was transfigured before their very eyes. His clothing sparkled, and he became glistening white, whiter than any bleach in the world could make them. Then suddenly, right in front of them, Moses and Elijah appeared, and they spoke with Jesus. Peter blurted out, "Beautiful teacher, this is so amazing to see the three of you together. Why don't we stay here and set up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah?" For all of the disciples were in total fear, and Peter didn't have a clue what to say. Just then, a radiant cloud began to spread over them and enveloping them all. And God's voice suddenly spoke from the cloud, saying, "This is my most dearly loved son. Always listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, the disciples saw only Jesus, for Moses and Elijah had faded away. As they all hiked down the mountain together, Jesus ordered them, "Don't tell anyone of what you just witnessed. Wait until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." So they kept it to themselves, puzzled over what Jesus meant about rising from the dead. Then they asked him, "Why do the religious scholars insist that Elijah must come before the Messiah?" He answered them, "They're right. Elijah must come first to put everything in order. And what about all that is written about the Son of Man? It is true that he must endure many sufferings and be rejected. So Elijah has already appeared, just as it was prophesied, and they did to him whatever they pleased." Now when they came down the mountain to the other 9 disciples, they noticed a large crowd of people gathered around them, with the religious scholars arguing with them. The crowd was astonished to see Jesus himself walking toward them, so they immediately ran to welcome him. "What are you arguing about with the religious scholars?" he asked them. A man spoke up out of the crowd. "Teacher," he said, "I have a son possessed by a demon that makes him mute. I brought him here to you, Jesus. Whenever the demon takes control of him, it knocks him down, and he foams at the mouth and gnashes his teeth, and his body becomes stiff as a board. I brought him to your disciples, hoping they could deliver him, but they were not strong enough." Jesus said to the crowd, "Why are you such a faithless people? How much longer must I remain with you and put up with your unbelief? Now bring the boy to me." So they brought him to Jesus. As soon as the demon saw him, it threw the boy into convulsions. He fell to the ground, rolling around and foaming at the mouth. Jesus turned to the father and asked, "How long has your son been tormented like this?" "Since childhood," he replied. "It tries over and over to kill him by throwing him into fire or water. But please, if you're able to do something, anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus said to him, "What do you mean, if? If you are able to believe, all things are possible to the believer." When he heard this, the boy's father cried out with tears, saying, "I do believe, Lord. Help my little faith." Now when Jesus saw that the crowd was quickly growing larger, he commanded the demon, saying, "Deaf and mute spirit, I command you to come out of him and never enter him again." The demon shrieked and threw the boy into terrible seizures and finally came out of him. As the boy lay there looking like a corpse, everyone thought he was dead. But Jesus stooped down gently, took his hand, and raised him up to his feet, and he stood there completely set free. Afterwards, when Jesus arrived at the house, his disciples asked him in private, "Why couldn't we cast out the demon?" He answered them, "This type of powerful spirit can only be cast out by fasting and prayer." They went on from there and walked through the region of Galilee. Jesus didn't want the people to know he was there because he wanted to teach his disciples in private. He said to them, "The Son of Man is destined to be betrayed and turned over to those who will execute him. But after 3 days, he will rise again." But the disciples didn't have a clue what he meant and were too embarrassed to ask him to explain it. Then they came to Capernaum. As soon as Jesus was inside the house, he asked his disciples, "What were you arguing about on the way here?" No one said a word because they had been arguing about which one of them was the greatest. Jesus sat down, called the 12 disciples to come around him, and said to them, "If anyone wants to be first, he must be content to be last and become a servant to all." Then he had a child come and stand among them. He wrapped the child in his arms and said to them, "Whoever welcomes a little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not only me, but the one who sent me." John spoke up and said, "Teacher, we noticed someone was using your name to cast out demons, so we tried to stop him because he wasn't one of our group." "Don't stop him," Jesus replied, "for the one who does miracles in the power of my name proves he is not my enemy, and whoever is not against us is for us. Listen to the truth that I speak. Whoever gives you a cup of water because you carry the name of Christ will never lose his reward. But if anyone abuses one of these little ones who believes in me, it would be better for him to have a heavy boulder tied around his neck and be hurled into the deepest sea than to face the punishment he deserves. If your hand entices you to sin, let it go limp and useless. For it is better for you to enter into life maimed than to have your entire body thrown into hell, the place of unquenchable fire. This is where the maggots never die and the fire never goes out. And if your foot leads you into sin, cut it off. For it is better to enter life crawling than to have both feet and be flung into hell. This is where the maggots never die and the fire never goes out. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. For it is better to enter into life with one eye than to be thrown into hell with two. This is where the maggots never die and the fire never goes out. Everyone will pass through the fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Salt is excellent for seasoning, but if salt becomes tasteless, how can its flavor ever be restored? Your lives, like salt, are to season and preserve. So don't lose your flavor, and preserve the peace in your union with one another. Then Jesus left the region and went into the district of Judea, across from the Jordan River, and again massive crowds flocked to him, and Jesus, as was his custom, began to teach the people. At one point, some of the Pharisees came, seeking to entrap him with a question. "Tell us," they asked, "is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife?" He answered them, "What did Moses command you?" They replied, "Moses permitted us to write a certificate of separation that would be valid to complete a divorce." Jesus said, "Yes, Moses wrote this exception for you because you are hard-hearted. But from the beginning, God created male and female. For this reason, a man will leave his parents and be wedded to his wife. And the husband and wife will be joined as one flesh. And after that, they no longer exist as two, but one flesh. So there you have it. What God has joined together, no one has the right to split apart." Once indoors, his disciples asked him to explain it to them again. So he said to them, "Whoever divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery against her. And if the wife divorces her husband and marries another, she also commits adultery." The parents kept bringing their little children to Jesus so that he would lay his hands on them and bless them. But the disciples kept rebuking and scolding the people for doing it. When Jesus saw what was happening, he became indignant with his disciples and said to them, "Let all the little children come to me and never hinder them. Don't you know that God's kingdom realm exists for such as these? Listen to the truth I speak. Whoever does not open their arms to receive God's kingdom like a teachable child will never enter it." Then he embraced each child, and laying his hands on them, he lovingly blessed each one. As Jesus started on his way, a man came running up to him. Kneeling down in front of him, he cried out, "Good teacher, what one thing am I required to do to gain eternal life?" Jesus responded, "Why do you call me good? Only God is truly good. You already know the commandments. Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give a false testimony, do not cheat, and honor your father and mother." The man said to Jesus, "Teacher, I have carefully obeyed these laws since my youth." Jesus fixed his gaze upon the man with tender love and said to him, "Yet there is still one thing in you lacking. No, thank you. Stop barking. Go, sell all that you have and give the money to the poor. Then all of your treasure will be in heaven. After you've done this, come back and walk with me." Completely shocked by Jesus' answer, he turned and walked away very sad, for he was extremely rich. Jesus looked at the faces of his disciples and said, "How hard it is for the wealthy to enter into God's kingdom realm." The disciples were startled when they heard this, but Jesus again said to them, "Children, it is next to impossible for those who trust in their riches to find their way into God's kingdom realm. It is easier to stuff a rope through the eye of a needle than for a wealthy person to enter into God's kingdom realm." But this left them all the more astonished, and they whispered to one another, "Then who could ever be saved?" Jesus looked at them and replied, "With people it is impossible, but not with God. God makes all things possible." Then Peter spoke up and said, "Can't you see that we've left everything we had to cling to you?" "Listen to my words," Jesus said. "Anyone who leaves his home behind and chooses me over children, parents, family, and possessions, all for the sake of the gospel, it will come back to him 100 times as much in this lifetime. Homes, family, mothers, brothers, sisters, children, possessions, along with persecutions, and in the age to come he will inherit eternal life. But many who are considered to be the most important now will be the least important then, and many who are viewed as the least important now will be considered the most important then." Jesus and his disciples were on the road that went up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was leading them forward. The disciples were filled with wonder and amazement at his bravery, but those following along with him were very afraid. As they approached the city, he took the 12 aside privately and told them what was going to happen. "I want you to know that we are going to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be handed over to the ruling priests and religious scholars, and they will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Romans. And they will mock him, spit in his face, torture him, and kill him. But 3 days later, he will rise again." Jacob and John, sons of Zebedee, approached Jesus and said, "Teacher, will you do a favor for us?" "What is it you're wanting me to do?" he asked. "We want to sit next to you when you come into your glory," they said. One at your right side and the other at your left." Jesus said to them, "You don't have a clue what you're asking for. Are you prepared to drink from the cup of suffering that I am about to drink?" And are you able to endure the baptism into death that I am about to experience? They replied, Yes, we are able. Jesus said to them, You will certainly drink from the cup of my suffering and be immersed into my death. But to have you sit in the position of highest honor is not mine to decide. It is reserved for those whom grace has prepared them to have it. Now the other 10 disciples overheard this, and they became angry and began to criticize Jacob and John. Jesus gathered them all together and said to them, Those recognized as rulers of the people and those who are in top leadership positions rule oppressively over their subjects. But this is not the example you are to follow. You are to lead by a different model. If you want to be the greatest one, then live as one called to serve others. The path to promotion and prominence comes by having the heart of a bondslave who serves everyone. For even the Son of Man did not come expecting to be served by everyone, but to serve everyone, and to give his life as the ransom price in exchange for the salvation of many. When Jesus and his disciples had passed through Jericho, a large crowd joined them. Upon leaving the village, they met a blind beggar sitting on the side of the road named Timaeus, the son of Timaeus. Interesting. When he heard that Jesus from Nazareth was passing by, he began to shout, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me now in my affliction. Heal me. Those in the crowd were indignant and scolded him for making so much of a disturbance. But he kept shouting with all his might, Son of David, have mercy on me now and heal me. Jesus stopped and said, Call him to come to me. So they went to the blind man and said, Have courage, get up, Jesus is calling for you. So he threw off his beggar's cloak, jumped up, and made his way to Jesus. Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? The man replied, My master, please let me see again. Jesus responded, Your faith heals you. Go in peace with your sight restored. All at once the man's eyes opened and he could see again, and he began at once to follow Jesus, walking down the road with him. Now, as they were approaching Jerusalem, they arrived at the place of the stables near Bethany on the Mount of Olives. Jesus sent 2 of his disciples ahead and said to them, As soon as you enter the village ahead, you will find a donkey's colt tethered there that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it to me. And if anyone asks, Why are you taking it? Tell them, The master needs it and will send it back to you soon. So they went and found the colt outside in the street, tied to a gate. When they started to untie it, some people standing there said to them, Why are you untying that colt? They answered, just as Jesus had told them, The master needs it, and he will send it back to you soon. So the bystanders let them go. The disciples brought the colt to Jesus and piled their cloaks and prayer shawls on the young donkey, and Jesus rode upon it. Many people carpeted the road in front of him with their cloaks and prayer shawls, while others gathered palm branches and spread them before him. Jesus rode in the center of the procession, with crowds going before him and behind him. They all shouted in celebration, Bring the victory! We welcome the one coming with the blessings of being sent from the Lord Yahweh. Blessings rest on this kingdom he ushers in right now, the kingdom of our father David. Bring us the victory in the highest realms of heaven. Jesus rode through the gates of Jerusalem and up to the temple. After looking around at everything, he left for Bethany with the 12 to spend the night, for it was already late in the day. The next day, as he left Bethany, Jesus was feeling hungry. He noticed a leafy fig tree in the distance, so he walked over to see if there was any fruit on it, but there was none. Only leaves, for it wasn't yet the season for bearing figs. Jesus spoke to the fig tree, saying, No one will ever eat fruit from you again. And the disciples overheard him. When they came into Jerusalem, Jesus went directly into the temple area and overturned all the tables and benches of the merchants who were doing business there. One by one, he drove them all out of the temple courts, and they scattered away, including the money changers and those selling doves. And he would not allow them to use the temple courts as a thoroughfare for carrying their merchandise and their furniture. Then he began to teach the people, saying, Does not the scripture say, My house will be a house of prayer for all the world to share? But you have made it a thieves' hanghouse. When the chief priests and religious scholars heard this, they began to hatch a plot as to how they could eliminate Jesus. But they feared him and his influence, because the entire crowd was carried away with astonishment by his teaching. So he and his disciples spent the nights outside the city. In the morning, they passed by the fig tree that Jesus spoke to, and it was completely withered from the roots up. Teacher, look! Peter remembered and said to him, Teacher, look, that's the fig tree you cursed. It's now all shriveled up and dead. Jesus replied, Let the faith of God be in you. Listen to the truth I speak to you. If someone says to this mountain with great faith and having no doubt, Mountain, be lifted up and thrown into the midst of the sea, and believes that what he says will happen, it will be done. This is the reason I urge you to boldly believe for whatever you ask for in prayer. Be convinced that you have received it and it will be yours. And whenever you stand praying, if you find that you carry something in your heart against another person, release him and forgive him, so that your Father in heaven will also release you and forgive you of your faults. But if you will not release forgiveness, don't expect your Father in heaven to release you from your misdeeds. They came again into Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the Jewish rulers, the chief priests, certain religious scholars, and the elders approached him. They came up to him and asked, "What right do you have to say and do these things? Who gave you the authority to do all this?" Jesus replied, "I too have a question to ask you. If you can answer that question, then I will tell you by what power I do all these things. Where did John's authority to immerse come from? Was it from heaven or from people? Answer me now." They stepped away and debated among themselves, saying, "How should we answer this? If we say from heaven, he will say to us, 'Then why didn't you respond to John and believe what he said?' But if we say from the people, we fear the crowds, for they're convinced that John was God's prophet." So they finally answered, "We don't know." "Then neither will I tell you where my power comes from to do these things," Jesus replied. Then Jesus began to speak to them in parables. There once was a man who planted a vineyard and put a secure fence around it. He dug a pit for its winepress and erected a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenant farmers and traveled abroad. When the time of harvest came, he sent one of his servants to the tenants to collect the landowner's share of the harvest. But the tenants seized him and beat him and sent him back empty-handed. So the owner sent another servant to them, and that one they shamefully humiliated and beat over the head. So he sent another servant, and they brutally killed him. Many more servants were sent, and they were all severely beaten or killed. The owner had only one person left to send, his only son, whom he dearly loved. So he sent him to them, saying, "Surely they will restrain themselves and respect my son." But the tenants saw their chance and said to one another, This is the heir. Come on, let's kill him, and then we'll inherit it all." So they violently seized him, killed him, and threw his body over the fence. So what do you think the owner of the vineyard will do? He will come and put to death those tenants and give his vineyards to others. Haven't you read what the psalmist said? "The stone of the builders examined and rejected has become the cornerstone, the most important stone of all. This was the Lord's plan, and he is wonderful for our eyes to behold." Now, the chief priests, religious scholars, and leaders realized that Jesus' parable was aimed at them. They had hoped to arrest him then and there, but they feared the reaction of the crowd, so they left him alone and went away. Then they sent a delegation of Pharisees together with some staunch supporters of Herod to entrap Jesus with his own words. So they approached him and said, "Teacher, we know that you're an honest man of integrity, and you teach us the truth of God's ways. We can clearly see that you're not one who speaks only to win the people's favor, because you speak the truth without regard to the consequences. So tell us then what you think. Is it proper for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" Jesus saw through their hypocrisy and said to them, "Why are you testing me? Show me one of the Roman coins." They brought him a silver coin used to pay the tax. "Now tell me," Jesus said, "whose head is on this coin and whose inscription is stamped on it?" "Caesar's," they replied. Jesus said, "Precisely. The coin bears the image of the emperor Caesar, so you should pay the emperor his portion. But because you bear the image of God, you must give back to God all that belongs to him." And they were utterly stunned by Jesus' words. Some of the Sadducees, a religious group that denied there was a resurrection of the dead, came to ask Jesus this question. "Teacher, the law of Moses teaches that if a man dies before he has children, his brother should marry the widow and raise up children for his brother's family line. Now, there was a family with 7 brothers. The oldest got married, but soon died, and he had no children. The second brother married his oldest brother's widow, and he also died without any children, and the third also. This repeated down to the 7th brother, none of whom had children. Finally, the woman died. So here's our dilemma. Which of the 7 brothers will be the woman's husband when she's resurrected from the dead, since they all were once married to her?" Jesus answered them, "You are deluded because your hearts are not filled with the revelation of the scriptures or the power of God. For when they rise from the dead, men and women will not marry, just like the angels of heaven don't marry. Now, concerning the resurrection, haven't you read in the Torah what God said to Moses at the burning bush? 'I am the living God, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob?' God is not the God of the dead, but of the living, and you are all badly mistaken." Now a certain religious scholar overheard them debating. When he saw how beautifully Jesus answered all their questions, he posed one of his own and asked him, "Teacher, which commandment is the greatest of all?" Jesus answered him, "The most important of all the commandments is this: the Lord Yahweh our God is one. You are to love the Lord Yahweh your God with every passion of your heart, with all the energy of your being, with every thought that is within you, and with all your strength. This is the great and supreme commandment. And the second is this: you must love your neighbor in the same way you love yourself. You will never find a greater commandment than these." The religious scholar replied, "Yes, that's true, teacher. You spoke beautifully when you said that God is one and there is no one else besides him. And there is something more important to God than all the sacrifices and burnt offerings. It's the commandment to constantly love God with every passion of your heart, with your every thought, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor in the same way as you love yourself. When Jesus noticed how thoughtfully and sincerely the man answered, he said to him, "You're not far from the reality of God's kingdom realm." After that, no one dared to question him again. While Jesus was teaching in the courts of the temple, he posed a question to those listening. Why do the religious scholars say that the Messiah is David's son? Yet it was David, inspired by the Holy Spirit, who sang, "The Lord Jehovah said to my Lord, sit near me in the place of authority until I subdue all your enemies under your feet." Since David calls him Lord, how can he be his son? The large crowd that had gathered around Jesus took delight in hearing his words. Jesus also taught the people, beware of the religious scholars. They love to parade around in their clergy robes and be greeted with respect on the street. They crave to be made the leaders of synagogue councils, and they push their way to the head table at banquets. For appearance's sake, they will pray long religious prayers at the homes of widows for an offering, cheating them out of their very livelihood. Beware of them all, for they will one day be stripped of honor, and the judgment they receive will be severe. Then he sat down near the offering box, watching all the people dropping in their coins. Many of the rich would put in very large sums, but a destitute widow walked up and dropped in 2 small copper coins, worth less than a penny. Jesus called his disciples to gather around and then said to them, "I tell you the truth, this poor widow has given a larger offering than any of the wealthy. For the rich only gave out of their surplus, but she sacrificed out of her poverty and gave to God all that she had to live on, which was everything she had." And that was Mark chapter 7 through chapter 12. The footnotes for these chapters will be in your Facebook comment section if that's where you're watching, or in a separate post on YouTube if that is where you are watching on that side of things. So, such good reading. The next time we'll pick up with Mark chapter 13, so be sure to come back for more when that is posted, and have a great rest of your day. Otherwise, blessings.